When we talk about the origin of the opioid crisis, heroin addiction, our minds usually default to images of, well, desperation, right?
Yeah.
The criminal element, the black market.
Mm-hmm.
But the cold, hard truth is that this epidemic was born clean, sterile, and entirely legal.
Yeah.
Fabricated not on the streets, but inside the gleaming, respected laboratories of major pharmaceutical companies.
That corporate history really is the definitive account of addiction in the modern world. We're diving into a stack of sources today that really challenge the conventional narrative.
Right.
Tracing the molecular journey of these powerful substances from like an ancient natural remedy all the way to a modern synthetic plague.
So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack that long, deceptive history, the one that links the two major corporate chapters of the opioid crisis.
Exactly. You've got the original deception involving Bayer and heroin.
Right.
And then the modern, truly devastating echo with Purdue and OxyContin.
And we'll see how geopolitics and organized crime only really stepped in to fill the huge vacuum created when medicine, well, failed to take ethical responsibility.
Yeah, we'll follow the molecule itself from its, unpredictable natural form in the poppy to its highly potent and fatally marketed version, and then finally to its synthetic industrialized apex, fentanyl.
And throughout this whole story, there's one consistent central lie, isn't there?
Absolutely. The claim that a powerful, highly addictive substance was somehow the key to curing addiction. It's quite something.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where does this incredibly long and complex relationship between humanity and opiates really begin? Like, long before the first corporation ever existed.
It begins with a flower, Papaver somniferum, the sleep-bearing poppy. It's got a history that stretches back, way back to the dawn of civilization.
Wow.
The Sumerians, over 4 millennia ago, they called it Hulgil, the joy plant.
The joy plant. That sounds, well, beautiful, but also kind of menacingly powerful, doesn't it?
It was. It was intimate, useful, but a somewhat blunt instrument, For millennia, the milky white sap collected from the poppy pod, that's opium, was pretty much the most effective pain relief available.
Okay.
The ancient Egyptians were using it, and the Ebers Papyrus from 1550 BC even notes it was prescribed to soothe crying children.
Yes.
But the potency varied wildly depending on the harvest, the preparation, making it really unpredictable.
That sounds like a fascinating chemical challenge then for the sort of burgeoning pharmaceutical industry of the 19th century. How do you take this natural, unpredictable thing and make it reliably effective?
Well, that transformation happened in Germany. In 1817, a pharmacist apprentice named Friedrich Surturner, he succeeded in isolating the active alkaloid.
Okay.
He named it morphine after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams.
Right.
And this was a huge triumph of chemistry. Doctors finally had a painkiller of known consistent purity, a chemical weapon against agony that was 10 times more potent than raw opium.
Wow. Okay, and here's where the technological context becomes kind of disastrous, right?
Right.
Sir Turner isolates pure morphine. And then separately, in the 1850s, the hypodermic syringe is invented. So now you're injecting pure, concentrated painkiller directly into the bloodstream, totally bypassing the digestive system.
The power was instantaneous, immense. And unfortunately, the American Civil War immediately became the largest, most uncontrolled clinical trial in history for this lethal combination.
Yeah, the sources detail the sheer scale of the distribution, and it's shocking. Millions of pills, tens of thousands of ounces of morphine powder distributed to treat the horrific wounds of that war.
Exactly. So when those soldiers returned home in 1865, they weren't just relying on opium or laudanum anymore. They were addicted to a highly refined chemical delivered with precision.
And this physician caused addiction, or what was the term? Iatrogenic.
Iatrogenic addiction, yes. It was so widespread it actually earned its own name, the soldier's disease. This was the first modern epidemic of mass addiction, and it happened entirely within the context of, legitimate medical treatment.
So the world now had this huge, devastating problem that needed a cure, and a corporate giant was ready to supply it. This is where we moved to Elberfeld, Germany, and the rise of Friedrich Bayer and Company.
That's right. Bayer was already a global success thanks to aspirin. Their quest was explicitly defined to find a drug with the incredible pain-relieving power of morphine, but without its dreadful curse of addiction. The public health crisis basically created a perfect, potentially immensely profitable market for a miracle drug.
And they assigned their chemist, Felix Hoffmann, to the task. He had already helped develop aspirin, right? So what did he create that they thought would solve the addiction problem?
He synthesized diacetylmorphine, Basically, by boiling morphine with acetic anhydride. It was just a slight molecular tweak of morphine itself.
Okay.
But critically, the head pharmacologist, Henrik Dresser, made the announcement and the promise that the resulting substance, heroin, was non-addictive.
Non-addictive.
And could actually cure morphine dependence. He was convinced, or at least he claimed to be, that the chemical adjustments separated the drug's beneficial properties from its addictive qualities.
How could they possibly have believed that? I mean, did the testing not show the addictive potential? Or did they just ignore it?
Well, this was the tragic leap of faith, perhaps, or maybe deliberate blindness.
How?
The very name they chose reflects the initial euphoric and ultimately deeply deceptive experience.
Heroin.
They named the drug heroin from the German word heroisch, meaning heroic, because initial test subjects reported feeling this pleasant euphoria, a sense of heroism. The branding was brilliant, but based entirely on a tragic, dangerous lie.
And their marketing campaign in 1898 was just relentless, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. They didn't just sell it. They sent free samples to doctors internationally, promoted it as a safe cure for everything, coughs, tuberculosis, asthma,
Right.
and most importantly, the cure for existing morphine and codeine addiction. They even sold it over the counter, in tablets, flavored elixirs for children.
For kids, it's hard to fathom now.
The corporate cover-up of the truth really began immediately with that marketing blitz. But, the molecule itself cannot be fooled.
Right.
Heroin is highly fat-soluble. That allows it to cross the blood-brain barrier with stunning speed, producing that immense initial rush that felt so heroic.
Okay.
But once inside the brain, the body's enzymes rapidly convert it right back into morphine. Just a supercharged, highly concentrated dose of it.
So the user wasn't getting some milder cure at all. They were getting a turbocharged delivery of the exact substance they were trying to quit.
Precisely. It was 2 to 3 times more potent than the original morphine. And it created what doctors quickly recognized as a more ravenous and intractable condition. They called it heroinism.
Heroinism.
Yeah. It became chillingly clear that one corporate-created epidemic morphine addiction had just paved the way for another, far worse, corporate-created plague. By 1905, the American Medical Association was forced to remove heroin from its list of accepted medicines, but the global damage, already irreversible.
So when that pharmaceutical door slammed shut, when heroin went from being this miracle cure to a medical pariah, the supply chain didn't just vanish, did it? The legal framework itself sort of created the criminal market.
That's the critical pivot point. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 in the U.S., it aimed to control narcotics, but in practice, it criminalized the act of prescribing narcotics simply to maintain an addict's habit.
So doctors just stopped out of fear.
Exactly. Doctors, terrified of prosecution, ceased treating thousands of dependent patients, leaving them, desperate.
The problem was basically forcibly wrenched out of the hands of the medical community and handed directly to the criminal justice system and, by extension, organized crime.
And global politics played a direct facilitating role in what happened next. When that legal supply evaporated, a geopolitical engine kicked in to perpetuate the flow. You see political objectives consistently prioritized over drug control.
Yeah, our sources illustrate this really clearly. In the post-WWII era, you had Corsican syndicates building massive labs in Marseille, refining opium, creating the French connection to supply the U.S. market.
Right.
And the reason they thrived, research by Alfred McCoy and others accuses French and even U.S. intelligence of tolerating or maybe even protecting these syndicates. Why? To prevent communist control of the Marseille waterfront.
It's this pattern of political expediency overriding public health, and this systemic failure continued across the globe. During the Vietnam War and the Golden Triangle, American officials were accused of exercising, and this is a quote, complicity, tolerance, or studied ignorance toward their anti-communist warlord allies who were heavily involved in the drug trade.
Warlords like Vang Pao.
Exactly. People like Vang Pao received arms, transport think air, America political protection, allow them to fund their political wars through drug profits.
And even when U.S. investigations like the Kerry Committee report in 1989 didn't find, direct CIA trafficking.
Right, no smoking gun of agents selling drugs themselves.
Yeah, but they still concluded that elements of groups supported by the U.S., like the Contras in Nicaragua, knowingly received financial and material assistance from drug traffickers.
The pattern is just undeniable. Institutional players, often intelligence agencies or military elements, perpetuated the flow of heroin when the pharmaceutical industry backed away. They ensured the supply chain remained resilient and highly profitable for criminal organizations, often for geopolitical reasons.
This history is just so devastating because the pattern of corporate deception didn't end with Bayer a century ago, did it? It echoed powerfully, showing that when profit is the primary motivator, history repeats itself with truly catastrophic precision.
Which brings us, unfortunately, to the second major corporate chapter. Beginning in 1996 with Purdue Pharma, owned by the Sackler family, and their drug, OxyContin.
Right.
This was a semi-synthetic opioid designed to mimic the pain-killing power of morphine and heroin, but with a supposed new twist.
And the central lie was instantly familiar to anyone who had studied the Bayer story, wasn't it? Purdue claimed its patented time-release mechanism meant the risk of addiction was less than 1%.
Less than 1%. According to our sources, this was just a baseless piece of fiction, a direct modern parallel to the heroin lie from almost 100 years earlier.
And the marketing push was just breathtaking in its scale and aggression.
Unbelievable. They focused on targeting general practitioners, not pain specialists, convincing them that severe pain was being undertreated across the board. They aggressively promoted this idea of pain as the fifth vital sign.
Putting pressure on doctors to prescribe.
Exactly. They sweetened the deal substantially, too, flying doctors to lavish, all-expenses-paid seminars, often in fancy resort settings.
Right.
Sales representatives were given massive bonuses based purely on prescription volume. That created this powerful financial incentive for them to push the drug relentlessly, regardless of the actual consequences for patients.
And just like with heroin, the chemical reality couldn't be contained by corporate promises or marketing slogans.
Nope. Users quickly realized they could just crush the pill to defeat the time-release mechanism. That delivered a massive, concentrated dose all at once, creating that intense euphoric rush. Purdue's deception had effectively created a whole new generation of chemically dependent people.
And this lethal prescription pad essentially became a conveyor belt, didn't it? When prescriptions became too expensive or difficult to get, or doctors finally cut patients off, where did the users go?
They transitioned to the cheaper, more available molecular cousin on the street. Heroin.
Because chemically, they're so similar.
Very similar. A heavy, say, $80 a day OxyContin habit could suddenly be sustained by a $10, $20 a day street heroin habit. You had high school athletes, suburban mothers, factory workers, people who never ever imagined touching an illicit substance. They were funneled directly from the pharmacy into the black market by the very companies that promised them safe relief.
Which leads us directly to the synthetic apex of this whole industrial supply chain, fentanyl. The origin of the crisis has now officially moved from agriculture, the poppy fields, to industrial chemistry.
Absolutely. Fentanyl is just staggeringly potent, 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin. It's synthesized rapidly in labs, primarily in Mexico now, using chemical precursors often sourced legally from places like China. Its rise is purely a function of, grim capitalist efficiency meeting criminality.
The risk versus profit calculation must be astronomical. That's why it dominates the market now.
It is astronomical. Think about it. 1 kilogram of pure fentanyl can yield the equivalent of maybe 50 kilograms of street-level product. It's cheaper to make, much easier to transport than bulky opium or heroin,
Right.
and far, far more potent. It's what's driving the overdose crisis exponentially. Fentanyl is now often pressed into pills designed to mimic legitimate prescription opioids like OxyContin or used to cut heroin, completing this incredibly destructive industrialized cycle.
So what does this all mean when we synthesize the whole story? We see that the current crisis isn't some inevitable consequence of human weakness or something. It's inextricably linked to deliberate, profitable corporate actions and then political actions or inactions.
Yeah. Addiction was medicalized by Bayer, then it was criminalized by things like the Harrison Act, then it was deliberately remedicalized and exploited by Purdue, and now it's sort of recriminalized and industrialized by the rise of fentanyl. The financial cost, and more importantly, the human cost, is consistently paid by the most vulnerable civilians.
And the sources really show how today's drug trade thrives, partly because it exploits the collapse of legitimate economic opportunities in many areas. Criminal groups act as sort of shadow overlords and employers in communities suffering from acute social distress.
They prey on the desperate. You see examples like Wayne in the source material, an isolated addict turned victim of debt bondage, or Henry, driven to theft to fund his habit after being pressured into using by dealers offering credit.
And these criminal networks are multi-tiered and incredibly resilient, aren't they? Violence isn't just a side effect, it's a core business practice.
It's a stable feature, absolutely. Used to control territory, used to corrupt officials. I mean, look at the former chief of Mexico's war on drugs, Genaro Garcia Luna, convicted of taking massive bribes from the Sinaloa cartel. It's used to ensure recruitment in these demoralized communities.
So the traditional war on drugs approach focuses relentlessly on enforcement, interdiction, eradication, but the sources seem to suggest a deep flaw in this logic.
Increasing law enforcement often tends to raise the street price of drugs, which, counterintuitively perhaps, boosts the profits for the traffickers who succeed. That enables them to hire more people, buy more weapons, corrupt more officials.
Right. It's a vicious cycle.
It really is.
Right.
Which raises a really important, maybe provocative question for you, the listener, to mull over. If the entire history of this crisis is fundamentally defined by corporate deception creating addicts in the first place, and if attempts to simply stop the drug flow often seem to only make criminal organizations richer and more violent, should the focus maybe shift entirely away from just eradication and enforcement towards addressing the deep wells of social vulnerability, economic desperation, and lack of opportunity that these organizations prey upon for their recruitment and their markets?